Hello, I'm Rob Califf, and I want to welcome you to another edition of the Life and Times of Famous Cardiologists. As you know, this is a session that I particularly take pride in and interest in because it gives me a chance to talk to interesting people about why they've been so successful. And for the audience, many of you write me notes and emails about the inspiration that you get from people who have either overcome difficulties or have just thought about great things to do and have gone out and done them. So we all get ideas about how to be better from successful people. So in that vein, we have Suzanne Oparil with us today, who is certainly an accomplished person in the cardiovascular field, really remarkable achievements. And as we were just discussing, a member of this underrepresented class of people in cardiovascular medicine, women. But before we get to that issue, let's talk a little bit about growing up, which is where I like to start these interviews. Where were you born, and what was your family like?
I was born in Elvira, New York. I was raised on a dairy farm, which gives you the work ethic right away. My parents were both immigrants from what is now the Czech Republic. And so we had this little edge of being not quite like everybody else. My father always had an accent throughout his life.
What did your father do for a living?
He was a dairy farmer.
Okay, and did your mother work on the farm also?
Oh, yeah, she was the house, and the very strict bounds of what one did. She did the house and the yard, and the garden, also some female things. And he took care of the animals and raised the crops.
And did you have brothers and sisters?
Yeah, I was the youngest of 5.
Wow.
And I was a menopausal baby. That changed things a little bit, because everybody was an adult by the time I came along.
So your next closest sibling was?
17 years older. And the oldest one, my oldest sister, who's now passed away, was 26 years older.
How many of your other brothers and sisters are still living?
2 of them have passed away, but they lived till, my oldest brother lived to be 89, and my oldest sister lived to be 91. So
pretty darn
I'm
good
not
track
too worried.
And so growing up then for you was quite different, because it was like an only child, but with 4.
Like an only child and with a lot of authority figures. So you did learn more or less not to screw up. Because although you were kind of the baby and treated well, still there were a lot of commands. Like when they were fixing machinery. You know, I don't know if you know anything about farming, but in the old days, the small family farm was you did all the work yourself. You figured out how to fix the tractor and so on. And they would say, go get such and such a wrench. And if I brought the wrong thing, you learn not to bring the wrong thing the second time. And there's probably good background for an academic career.
So you literally grew up doing work on the farm yourself?
Doing work on the farm, yeah.
And so, I actually don't know much about farming. My dad was an architect, and I didn't live in a big city. I grew up in South Carolina, but definitely not on a farm. Although my wife grew up on a farm, and many of her relatives. So, from my understanding of it, probably people got up early in the morning and knocked off fairly early because there was a lot of physical work that had to be done.
Milked the cows, took a little rest in the afternoon. Yeah, it was very busy. So what I learned from that is nature is wonderful. It's very beautiful in the summertime, excellent thing. But it's not something that you want to do for your life because there's not enough variety.
Interesting. And so how did you get encouraged to go academic? I mean, when you were young, were your parents insistent that you study, or how did that work?
No, I was self-motivated, and I used to read a lot. So I figured out that I wanted to be a bacteriologist at that time. This was so long ago. There were lots of books about Koch and Pasteur. And so I thought this would be a cool career.
So the old-fashioned reading.
The old-fashioned reading, yeah. But then one day my brother, who was a salesman, who was not academic or anything, said, I remember we were reading the comics in the paper when I was about 8 years old. He said, you don't want to just be a scientist and get a PhD. You want to go to medical school. Because he told me you could do the same work and make a lot more money.
Aha.
How he knew that, I don't know. But I
well,
said,
that's a salesman probably could figure that out.
Okay, I'll do that.
And what was school like when you were growing up?
School was very interesting. Oh, that's another thing. You know, I'm going to sound like a fossil here, though. I went to a 2-room school.
Hard to imagine.
Carr's Corner School that was built in 1863 and demolished in 1963. And it originally had been a 1-room school where my siblings went. It had all 8 grades. in there. And then they divided it, so we had the 1st through the 4th, and then the 5th through the 8th. And so what accelerated the education was you're in this room where the teacher was teaching 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade.
So you could
and
move along.
And they figured out
if you could.
that I knew the higher up stuff. So I actually skipped 2 grades.
So you graduated
the 4th
from
and the 6th.
high school at what age?
16.
Gee. Did you feel that was okay socially?
Oh, yeah, because I wasn't all that social. What did I know? If you don't know what you mean.
I guess in a small school like that, you
yeah.
didn't have the same kind of social issues that teenagers have.
Not as much. There were only like 84 students in the class. And I was active in activities, all the clubs and so on.
So how old were you when this transformation to go into medicine occurred?
Oh, I was about 8 or 9 when I thought I would want to do that.
So, and did you ever waver from age 8 or 9?
I didn't really think about it. I thought, I'm going to have to do something because I don't want to be a farmer's wife and do this for the rest of my life. So I think, the practical thing was get to the next step and go to a good college, and maybe you can go on from there to something good.
So, my experience was so different. I went to a very large high school and had counselors and all that stuff to help you. So I'm trying to envision what it's like at the time when you were there at age 16 applying to college and how...
We had a counselor, and they knew that I was a very good student. So they said, you can probably go any place. But at that time, I did not want to go to a girls' school because I knew I wasn't too swift and I'd be too isolated. So I picked the colleges that were coeducational in the region. I ended up at Cornell.
Cornell. And how was that?
It was good.
What did you major in?
It was very zoology, which is the predecessor of biology. It didn't even have the genetic code then. This was 1957, Rob.
I was 6 years old at that point.
Right, that's right. Oh, yeah, that was a long time ago. But it was fairly big. There were about 2,000 in the class. And most of the people came from New York City. Although it's a worldwide university, the undergraduates were heavily in the region. So they were a lot more sophisticated than I was. And I learned a lot from them. And, tried not to be intimidated. Tried to just keep going. And it worked out well.
And how did it work socially, being 16, heading to...
Well, there were a lot
Cornell?
of people. There were a lot of people like that.
So that was common at that
That was
point.
common at that time, pushing people ahead. And I still believe in it.
Was there anyone at the university who had a special influence on you to influence your career or your thinking?
I think that my advisor was a man named Bill Wimsatt, who was a bat biologist. He studied vampire bats. And he was very laid back, and he said, you don't really have to push too much or worry too much. You're a superb student. If you want to go to medical school, I would advise you not to do research now, but take a good mix of courses and build a sort of a rounded background. I think that was good advice.
So then the time came to apply to medical school, and what were you thinking then?
I was just thinking I'll apply. And
did you look at a lot of places, or did you pick out one place you really wanted
This
to go?
is so old. You don't understand how it used to be. There wasn't 1,000 applications on the computer. I picked the best school. So I picked Harvard, Columbia, Cornell, and as a safe haven, Syracuse. And I got accepted every place, and even without interviews, just based on the record.
Wow. And where did you go?
I went to Columbia because I thought it was more humanely oriented, if you will, more clinically oriented, more oriented toward patients. And the Harvard thing seemed a little bit uptight to me. And it also appealed to me going to New York.
Had you actually worked with patients before going to medical school?
Oh, yes. I had a little job I started working when I was like 14, 15, in the local hospital as a phlebotomist.
Wow. So you're one of those people who grew up wanting to be a doctor and did it.
Yeah, and washing test tubes, which is one good thing they didn't have AIDS then, because things got recycled then. You didn't discard, you didn't have disposable plastic stuff. So we washed test tubes and fried them and everything.
Wow.
And it was nice. There was a very supportive environment because the lab technicians were very nice and encouraging, and the pathologists were very nice. So I got to help doing autopsies. Basically, I recorded the weights of the organs.
So you were really ready then when it came to medical school.
Oh yeah. I thought it was very interesting.
So you arrive at Columbia, and did you know what kind of doctor you wanted to be?
Absolutely not.
So how did that go?
Well, first advice I got was in the anatomy course. I got called in by the professor who said, asked me a bunch of questions. And he said, now I understand you. You're just like my wife. And I said, how? Because what had happened was that I had scored, I really aced the written exam. But on the practical, I couldn't tell an ear from a nose or a rectum. I was just horrible at spatial orientation. So we went through all this, and he said, you probably will do very well in medical school, but you have to promise me one thing. Don't go into surgery. So that was kind of set there. And so I decided something medical, not surgical. But I wanted something related to patients, so that means internal medicine broadly.
How many women were in your medical school class?
12 out of 120, 10%. New York was sort of ahead of most other places, more liberal. We'd had female students, although they were unusual ones, back into the 20s.
So did the women bond in that class, or was it really not an issue?
I had a very good friend who, probably my best friend there was a woman who was Chinese. The others didn't particularly bond. I mean, we were friends, but
you were just going to medical school.
Just going to medical school. And it was fun. It was like being in college because I was young. And it was another experience. It was like a second college.
Were there any professors there that, other than the one who told you not to be a surgeon, who had a big influence on you?
Oh, yes. Particularly one of the attendings who was an immunologist. And he was very friendly with Ed Haber, who became my mentor at Harvard. And I was didn't know what I wanted to do. And then my father died from heart failure when I was right around the time that you had to decide what you wanted to do. So I said, why not cardiology? And we had the drama of closed chest resuscitation was just coming around, so we could bring people back to life. That was thrilling. And all the intensive care in cardiology. So I decided to do that. And then when I told Dr. Canfield about that, he said, oh, no, my best friend from the NIH training, what is now NHLBI, is Edgar Haver, and he's this brilliant man at the Mass General. So you should apply to there. So I did. And this was a disappointment, though. This was funny, because a bunch of us did, because in the Vietnam War, there was a situation where the internship and the first year of residency went together, and then frequently there was a gap. So we went to the chairman's office and said, sir, we would like to stay for a third year. And he said, sorry, all the veterans are coming back from Vietnam. There's no place for you. You're going to have to go someplace else. So we went to Harvard. We went to the MBA.
It's not a bad
choice. But the frustration was, and maybe this is sexism, I was sort of interested in research, but I knew I could do cardiology. Everybody applied for the clinical slots. All the men got the clinical slots, and I got put in Hager's lab, which is the best thing that could have happened.
Yeah.
Because we spent 2 years there.
And what did you do in the research room?
This is great, and this is, I suppose, part of it. We're supposed to be inspiring people to do things. If you're going to be successful in research, timing means a lot. And that was just at the time when angiotensin had been purified, and Ed Haber was basically an immunologist more than a cardiologist. He just happened to be put in the cardiology chief's job because he was the smartest person around, I think. And so he developed a radioimmunoassay for angiotensin 1. So we had these renin assays, and then we had the labeled peptide angiotensin 1, angiotensin 2. So my first project was, where is angiotensin 1 converted to 2? And it was mostly in the lung, but also in other organs. So it was fairly major. The person who did it first with bioassay technique won the Nobel Prize. We were second, but it still was a major contribution. And we worked with dogs, infusing and collecting peptides and then measuring them by electrophoresis.
And you felt, as you were going through that, you felt positive the whole way?
Oh, yeah, it was very cool. For one thing, it was very new.
Yeah.
So the endless literature review that you have now wasn't really necessary. And I also could do a project on my fellowship mates. We did upright tilting and measured renin release and catecholamine release. And some people who fainted, the renin didn't go up and the catechols didn't go up. That was a paper.
Wow.
Only 3 lines of criticism.
Now, was there informed consent required for those?
Are you kidding me? I think we paid them $20.
$20 to...
Yeah, right. It was just a vena function.
So then you finished your fellowship, and what did you do next?
Looked at jobs, and at the time there was growth, pretty major growth in academic medicine. So I looked at a bunch of places. I picked the University of Chicago, which is a very good place, research-oriented in cardiology.
You know, I forgot to ask, so you did your clinical part of your fellowship.
Clinical part of the fellowship. Clinical part of the fellowship was pretty abbreviated because the cath lab was not my friend, okay?
Right. So spatial orientation is the same.
Spatial orientation is the same thing. And I thought, why should I do all this since I don't think I'm going to be able to do it in a career? And I don't think it will combine very well with the research interest unless you're developing a new catheter or some sort of new approaches. So I really only did 1 clinical year.
And nobody seemed to mind that.
Oh, no. That was not a problem then. I think we overtrain people now because every cardiology fellow has to learn everything, much of which he won't use in the future career. And definitely it's very difficult if you're going to do investigation.
Now I want to get back to that thought in a bit. So, but let's follow the trail here. University of Chicago.
Yeah.
What did you do there?
I developed a program. Got there. Unfortunately, Hans Hecht, who was the chair of medicine and the chief of cardiology both, died from a massive MI while in the swimming pool while we were driving from Boston to Chicago. So
wow.
that changed things a little bit. But we built up a program in hypertension, which I had never done anything with hypertension in the fellowship. I just thought this would be a logical area because it's something that's growing now, it's interesting, and it doesn't require huge physical demands. You can do it seeing patients 1 day a week and doing research the rest of the time. And your attending in general cardiology was adequate because everybody didn't get cath done.
And what years were those?
That was in Chicago, 1971 to 77.
What were your main accomplishments during that time? So you built a program.
Built a program.
What came from it?
I think that we worked out a little bit more about the angiotensin metabolism. We did a lot of clinical trials. There were new antihypertensive drugs coming along. You know, we worked with beta blockers, we worked with ACE inhibitors, angiotensin receptor blockers.
So you must have a great sense of accomplishment about being a key leader as this terrible stroke rate and all was brought under some control with these new treatments.
Yeah, and we needed new approaches because the old treatments hadn't fully worked. And even now, you know, we have a long way to go.
So we get to 1977, you got a program built. Why would you ever leave Chicago?
Because the program was a little bit too small. There was a philosophy that professors were professors and you really could function on your own doing, like I was the hypertension person and that was it. And there was an opportunity in Alabama to build a bigger program with more people, less restriction on who could be appointed and so on. So that was better.
I still think it's a little bit of a mystery to many people about what actually happened at University of Alabama to make it into such a powerhouse of cardiovascular medicine.
They call it vision, doctor. What happened was that because Birmingham had such a horrible reputation for the bull connor and the dogs and the cruelty to minorities, some people that came in there, including the deans of the medical, and actually the presidents of the medical center, decided we are going to make this different. We're going to do things like, and they did, integrate the hospital, which was unusual in the 60s in the South. They decided that Also, another little chapter was the steel industry was very powerful then, the Pittsburgh of the South, and it was dwindling. Obviously, the heads of the companies were in Pittsburgh, so Birmingham took the hit before Pittsburgh did. Decided if Birmingham's going to be something, we have to find a new area. And this was before Silicon Valley. So they decided medicine would be a good area for us. A lot of sick people here, a lot of minorities. There was Lister Hill was a senator from Alabama who put forth a lot of legislation.
Did you get to know Lister Hill?
No, I arrived later. I think he had died already. But there was a lot of vision that we're going to build up this program. And a major recruit for them was John Kirkland, the great cardiac surgeon.
Yeah, I got to know John Kirkland very well.
You did?
Yes, because he was, as you know, very interested in databases, and we had this database,
Right.
so he would visit frequently, and he always amazed me because it's not. He definitely had an ego, but he also had a plan for everything.
Yes.
I still remember he would always tell me the best meeting is when you've decided everything before the meeting, and then the meeting can be very short. So a very surgical approach. But he did have a major influence. But was he the founding? How did you and he relate? When did you arrive relative to his?
He had been there. He arrived in 1963. He'd been there a long
time.
And I arrived in 77. Tinsley Harrison also was a major figure in American cardiology. Was there.
What was Tinsley Harrison like?
He had sort of disappeared from the scene, although he was still alive when I arrived there.
And Kirkland, what was it like interacting with John in those younger years?
It made you very nervous. Because you
it?
knew he had a plan, and he was very, you wanted to make sure that you were on the right side of the plan.
Yeah, I think today young people probably don't realize how strong and enormous UAB became in cardiovascular medicine.
Tom James, who recruited me, was really a cardiac pathologist, but he was also very strong.
So what was your plan when you got to Alabama? And, of course, you've been there ever since, right?
Yeah. Tried to build a hypertension program, and it happened that at the same time I was recruited, Harriet Dustin, who's really one of the founders in clinical hypertension, came there. So we had pretty abundant space resources and resources from the state to recruit people. So we wanted really a multifactorial program with basic research, because I was still doing work with dogs and rats and mice, but always practiced medicine also. And she did the old-fashioned kind of clinical research, the GCRC kind of clinical research, high salt, low salt, and so on. It also had an education program very early on, partnering with the Department of Education. I remember, did surveys about how effective hypertension education programs would be with not very literate, mainly minority patients, whether they really learned and whether that changed their behavior and whatnot. That was way ahead of their time. People are still doing that.
They are, but what would you say if I sort of challenged it and said, okay, we've done a lot of things, but still, particularly in the South, we have the same problem in the Carolinas that there is in Alabama. We still have a long way to go, don't we? And why is that?
Absolutely.
What have we not done right to conquer this problem?
I think the basic problem is education, probably, and belief. If you were a poor minority person in the South, I think you probably wouldn't believe what you were being told by people like me or people like you. So it's cultural.
And so what do you hope will happen now over the next period of time to fix it?
Well, I hope that more modern techniques and how to motivate people, that there's really more emphasis on prevention, because usually by the time patients who have bad hypertension and are complicated by heart failure get serious about their care, they're very problematic.
Do you have hope that things are going to go the right direction?
I hope so, but these are tough times, so we have to be realistic and patient. But I think really increasing physical activity, it all goes back to children and adolescents. Increasing physical activity, better diet.
Now, One of the things I wanted to make sure that we got your views on was women in cardiology. Over the years, I've been on several committees to look at this issue, that it's still, other than urology, we have the lowest proportion of women of any specialty in medicine. Why is that?
I think because traditionally heads of cardiology have been very tough, and they've had the sort of a military attitude. You have to be there. Everybody has to do the same thing, and the job has to be the number one priority. And I think probably we need to be a little bit, the establishment, whatever, I'm not head of anything major, need to be a little bit more understanding about that. Clearly, people can make huge contributions not even working full time. So we have to be able to carve out different kinds of careers. Now, this is not a good time to be working on that because RVUs are getting to be more of a dominant force. But I think women in cardiology, if you think you want to go into cardiology, you have to be a little bit realistic. What are your life plans? Do you want to have a lot of children? I happen not to have children, but I like to spend time doing things like traveling, and I used to ride horses a lot and so on. I want to have a life other than medicine. So you can't aspire to be the world's greatest interventional cardiologist with the 70-hour work week.
Do you find yourself mentoring women particularly, or when you look at your career?
Yeah, I have.
Do you think mentoring women is any different than mentoring men?
No, not really. But I think also women have to be a little bit tougher. I mean, really, nobody cares about, whether you're nursing your baby. Nobody except you and your husband or your significant other cares about whether you're nursing your baby or not, and whether you don't feel well during pregnancy. So you got to suck that up. It's professionalism.
My own view is that, of course, everyone's an individual. On average, though, for men, it's a little different mentoring women than it is mentoring men, because things happen with men, I call it the locker room phenomenon, and you're rooming together at the meetings or whatever. Right. The other thing, and I got in a little trouble for saying this, it actually showed up in a Harvard report one time, but it's actually true. Up until recently, I never had a man cry in my office, but and for men, it's very disarming when that happens. Right. So I think there are some, being the tough cardiologist is a tall order for everybody, and maybe we can figure out how to change it. Although I agree with what you say. Right now, there's so much focus on efficiency.
So much focus on efficiency, yeah. I think there should be flexibility. You can't expect to be paid X dollars if you're only working X divided by 3 or X divided by 2 amount of time. So you have to be realistic. But I think that maybe the culture of the people who are at the top should be a little bit softer, realizing that, there could be somebody who's a superb nuclear person or a superb echo person that is a woman that does not want to work, doesn't have to work full time, doesn't want to work full time, that can be a great contributor. That's what I think I am with my research, because I'm not, if you calculate the hours that I actually work, they're not that great. A lot of time is spent with thought and writing things, and that's not work, that's fun.
That I agree with you. Work is what you have to do.
Work is what you have to do, yeah. Try to minimize that. And I wish they wouldn't have so many forms that have to be filled out and so many questionnaires. Yes.
Now, was your decision not to have children a conscious, purposeful decision?
Yeah, I never really wanted to do that, and I wasn't encouraged by my mother to do that. So everybody doesn't, I like animals, horses.
Well, everyone's different, and
everyone's
I think,
different.
Hearing that you can think that way and still have a lot of fun things to do is important.
Right.
I do notice.
Children aren't always a lot of fun. You didn't know that?
We've been through many times with our children, and but I will say, I think one of the issues for women, particularly in cardiology, is the time for social activity is not as great.
Right.
And I think I often see a lot of ambivalence about how to deal with it. So it sounds like in your case there was not ambivalence. You knew what you wanted and you did it.
Yeah.
That's a great thing.
Some people have more need for social activity and talking, and I'm happy being by myself reading a book.
This discussion is fascinating to me because your views and your personal sort of things that you like are distinctly different than a lot of other people I've talked to, and that's pretty amazing. And it's worked very well.
So it shows that you can be weird and still succeed, right?
Absolutely.
Got you.
Tell me what you think about this. I mean, when we talk about the Duke Fellowship, we constantly have these arguments. Some people say we should pick the chief residents because they're great doctors and they're going to be very good with clinical matters. And several of us say, no, we should really look for kind of weird people, because if you look at the people that make a difference in the world, they're typically not the people that are most easy to fit into the average social situation. They look at the world from a different perspective. I was greatly influenced by Eugene Stead, who definitely saw the world totally orthogonal to everybody else. Right.
Yeah, I would go for Plan B, as long as you have to be careful not to get somebody who's so disruptive that it destroys the program.
Yeah. So if you were looking now at a young person thinking about a career in cardiology, what would be the most important advice you could give them?
Are you thinking about academic cardiology or cardiology?
Pick either, or both. Get.
Okay. I would say that the thing that you, medical resident, should think about is what you really want to do, what you're really good at, not how lucrative something is or how prestigious it is. Because guess what? For one thing, this may change in 2 or 3 years. It may have already changed. So find something that you like to do, and try to, always stay on top of things. Don't become a factory worker. Don't have your goal be how many cases you can do, or how you can have a bigger house than the next guy that you trained with. Find something you like to do, develop an interest in it, and also develop your other interests. I think clinicians as well as academicians can sort of run out of steam because they work too hard.
And as you look forward now, what do you hope to accomplish over the next several years?
Well, I have funding till 2018. So
that's not bad.
Actually, I've moved somewhat into your area, Rob. We're pretty active in clinical trials, and we're involved in a study called SPRINT, which is dealing with a very critical question, whether in people who do not have diabetes, but are at risk because of other things, like chronic kidney disease, old age, which is a big one, and underlying cardiovascular disease, whether getting to a systolic blood pressure of 120, normalizing blood pressure, which all the hypertension experts have been telling people is a good idea, versus the old 140 standard, based in the 1920s and 30s. Very important question, and it's interesting to play that out.
I had the pleasure of being on the committee that sort of didn't come up with the idea, but first committee.
You were on the committee. You were the chair.
Yeah.
Remember?
So I'm glad to see it playing out, and it'll be fascinating to see how it works. Do you think the ACCORD results make it less of a question or more of a question?
Well, more of a question, because they really give you equipoise. The question is, if you have a group that's at risk because they're old, number one, and have kidney disease, maybe stroke will become more common than heart attack, so that a positive stroke result would be important.
The last question I'll ask you is, what's your current definition of old?
5 years older than I am.
There you go. That's a great answer. Well, I think this has been another fascinating interview, and I hope those of you looking at it take some notes about how a person can have a view of the world and have goals and achieve those goals and still be excited about the next project going into 2018. So thanks for joining me. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it.